Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. We're gathered, as always, on this ancient land in the North Saskatchewan River Valley, where people have been gathering for thousands of years. This Treaty 6 land, this land of the Otipemisiwak Métis Nation, and their deep connection to this place. We're here because it's time for Albertans to act. We are dealing with the most corrupt government in Alberta's history. We've seen patterns of corruptions from luxury skyboxes to government contracts worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars given to friends of the UCP. This is troubling, and it is a pattern. Albertans have seen scandal after scandal, every single one of us chipping away, every single one of them chipping away at public trust in our democratic institutions. From Hockeygate to the Turkish Tylenol scandal, $100 million bucks, to corrupt care. This government has shown a complete disregard for ethics, for transparency, and for accountability. We've seen innumerable sole source contracts handed out without any competition directly to friends of the government. We've seen government officials, including ministers, accepting playoff skybox tickets from companies doing business with the province, and perhaps these things never being disclosed. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a government that puts insiders ahead of everyday Albertans. And the other important thing to note about this is one of the very first things this government did when it was elected, one of the very first things Danielle Smith and her staff did when elected was to change the rules to allow this. This is not normal. This was not allowed before in Alberta. It's not allowed in municipal governments. It's not allowed at the federal government. It is not normal. It is a set of rules that the Premier has put in order to benefit herself and her friends. And just this week, we saw the UCP fire the Auditor General because he was investigating this stuff, which they have also done before. Albertans deserve so much better than this, and that's why today we are introducing, my colleague Kyle Kasowski is introducing as a private member's bill, Bill 202, the Ethical Governance Act. This bill is about restoring integrity to government. The bill proposes stronger gift rules, stronger codes of conduct for political staff, an expanded definition of conflict of interest, and expanded restrictions on how elected officials can use their influence for self-serving purposes. That may sound a bit in the weeds, but this is about setting guardrails. It's about setting ethical guidelines that government must follow, because this government has shown it does not have its own internal moral compass. Albertans deserve ethical, competent government. We deserve it now. We deserve a government we can trust. So to walk us through the details of this legislation, I'll turn it over to the author of the legislation, my colleague Kyle Kasowski, MLA for Sherwood Park and our Shadow Minister for Affordability and Utilities.
Thanks so much, Nahed. When we become MLAs, we take an oath of office. It's a commitment to selfless service to Alberta and to the rule of law. The oath reminds us that we govern not by force, not by favor, but by the laws that protect the public interest. And in democracy, elected representatives don't govern alone. We rely on trusted advisors and political staff to help us do the work of governing. That's why it's important that those individuals, especially those closest to the Premier, are held to the same ethical standard as elected officials. Unfortunately, under the UCP, that hasn't been the case. We've seen unelected insiders wield enormous influence, often more than cabinet ministers themselves, and yet they've operated with fewer rules and less oversight. In 2023, the UCP government raised the limit on gifts for MLAs that they can accept without the Ethics Commissioner approval from $200 to $500. They raised the limit on event tickets that MLAs can accept without disclosing it to the Ethics Commissioner from $400 to $1,000. And they shifted power over these limits from the legislature to the cabinet behind closed doors, meaning the UCP can change ethics rules without public debate or a vote in the Assembly. After years of UCP ministers accepting lavish gifts and perks while everyday Albertans are struggling with affordability, we can do better in order to restore trust, enforce ethical standards, and make sure government works for people, not insiders. That's why today I'm proud to introduce Bill 202, the Ethical Governance Act. or what I like to call the No More Skyboxes bill. This legislation puts guardrails back in place for MLAs, cabinet ministers, the premier, and the political staff who work with them. It ensures the public office is used to serve Albertans, not to serve elected officials and their friends. Let me walk you through some of the key changes. First, the bill strengthens gift rules. Ministers, MLAs, and ministerial staff would be required to disclose any gift over $100 within 15 days. Gifts from lobbyists or businesses with government contracts would be prohibited, and the Ethics Commissioner would once again have the authority to approve or reject gifts, restoring the rightful role of the Ethics Commissioner in our democracy. Second, the bill strengthens a mandatory code of conduct for political staff. These are the people who help shape decisions at the highest levels of government. The bill would provide clear rules on gifts, disclosure, and make clear the roles of the Ethics Commissioner in investigating breaches. Third, the bill expands the definition of conflict of interest to include not just explicit conflicts, but also the situations where decisions may appear to be influenced by private interests. Finally, the bill tightens restrictions on influence. MLAs would be prohibited from using their position to benefit themselves or close associates. That's a basic principle of ethical governance, and it's long overdue in Alberta. These rules will act as safeguards to limit and hopefully help prevent future Turkish Tylenol, corrupt care, or Skybox suite scandals. Bill 202 is about restoring the role of Ethics Commissioner, rebuilding trust, and recommitting to selfless service. If you're not ready to serve Alberta in this role, then go work somewhere else. But if you are, these are the rules we need and the rules Albertans would expect of all of us. Thank you, and we'll now take questions.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We are going to start taking questions beginning in the room. I see that we have a number of people who are also have their hands up on Zoom to ask questions. We'll be getting to you momentarily. If you do have a question that is off topic, that will not be embargoed, but any questions about this bill, I would remind you, are embargoed until this afternoon when the bill is tabled in the legislature, which generally happens at approximately 3 o'clock. Starting in the room with Sean Amato from City News.
Hi, Mr. Nenshi. So when this whole Skybox business happened, it was the Premier's breakfast at K-Days. So I was asking Albertans, what do you think about this situation? And a lot of Albertans told me, well, why wouldn't they take free tickets at work? I take free tickets at work. Edmonton, Calgary, lots of people get free tickets from their oil companies or from their businesses, and they go and they enjoy a hockey game, and that's considered part of our culture, I guess. So why shouldn't MLAs be able to do the same and get some free tickets from work?
I mean, look, I'm from Calgary, so I'm not really that familiar with playoff hockey, but I don't really have a problem with, people accepting things as a matter of doing business. The real problem is when you accept gifts from people that you then sign contracts for millions of dollars of taxpayer money with, and you never tell anybody. So, there's a photo behind me here, and that photo reminds me that the Premier first denied that she was accepting any of these perks. She denied that she was ever in a box with Sam Raish. Sam Raish is sitting behind her in that photo. Then she said, oh no, I was a guest of a government agency, Invest Alberta. Invest Alberta says, no, we don't buy tickets. She wasn't a guest of ours. The story keeps changing. So it's not a matter of saying the Premier shouldn't go cheer on an Alberta hockey team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. The issue is the Premier ought not to be accepting these gifts from people that she's then signing contracts with, but also that people, Albertans, deserve to know. The number one most important thing is disclosure. And we have had a number of cabinet ministers admit to going to boxes with Mr. Mraish, and it never shows up on their ethics disclosure, even though they admitted it. This is not the norm in any other government, and it needs to be fixed.
You were questioning the Premier yesterday about recalls happening. The Premier essentially said that some Albertans are trying to overthrow her government by improperly using the recall legislation that they brought in. She said there's no plans to amend that legislation at this moment, which means we could be seeing some in the future, depending on how these recall campaigns go. Just looking for your reaction to her comments yesterday.
There were a couple of things. Number one is, look, the premier was exhausted. She's missed she's missed almost all of the sitting days so far, half the sitting days this fall. She just got back from the Middle East. But sometimes when you're tired, we actually see the truth creep out. So the contempt with which she was treating citizens using her own legislation. She says she believes in direct democracy, but when people use it against her, suddenly it's overthrowing the government. She's using inflammatory language to demonize just everyday citizens, grandmas and mums and teachers who are going door to door in their neighborhoods collecting signatures. And she's talking about them like there's some violent party that's trying to overthrow her government. But here's the thing about this premier. She is the most disloyal person I've ever seen. She's disloyal to her colleagues, and she's disloyal to her ethics. So if she believes in direct democracy, guess what? That means you believe in democracy for everybody, not just for your friends. And as soon as she gets any threat, she takes the cowardly way out. She changes the rules to make it impossible to threaten her. Well, Albertans know better. Albertans know she is not the empress. And if she believes in direct democracy for some, she should believe in direct democracy for all.
Catherine Gurkowski, All Alberta.
So I guess I'll start with a more technical question.
I'm
So
shocked, Catherine, shocked.
So is this then moving all of these rules out of the decision-making authority of Executive Council and back into legislation, including the limits?
That's right. And I'll ask Kyle if he has more to say about this. But part of the problem here is not only did the government change the rules to allow all of this stuff, they also disguised it all by moving it into the premier's office, where the premier's chief of staff or the premier herself get to make these decisions. We believe these decisions should be made in the full light of day, and we believe it makes way more sense to have them in legislation that has to come to the legislature to be changed instead of in regulations that can be changed by the premier on a whim. Do you want to add to that, Kyle?
Sure.
And I'll just add, I think when we consider when we're talking about gift limits and that activity within political operations, we want to re-empower the ethics commissioner. And so that's key here. We're taking this away from the secret cabinet meetings, and we're bringing this into the light of day where the ethics commissioner then is re-empowered to decide, is there a conflict of interest in receiving a gift? And is the gift, too generous for even the acceptable limits that the UCP have, which they seem to be very self-serving when it comes to whenever they receive gifts.
Okay, and I guess I'm looking for some more clarification on the line between doing business as a member of government versus self-enrichment. Because if the government is meeting with somebody and then the government makes a deal, is that not doing government business? Where's the line on personal enrichment there?
The line is clear. As a cabinet minister doing business, you should not be accepting any gifts. Yeah.
All right,
That
we're
should
going
be a
to,
decider of what is the reason for sole sourcing a contract or giving out a contract.
okay, we're going to go to Zoom now. And just a reminder, if you have a question and you're on Zoom, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. We're going to start with Raheem Mohammed from the National Post.
Hi, Raheem. How's Ottawa?
We're missing Alberta and wanting to be Alberta bound in the very near future.
There you go.
I wanted to start with an incident in the Legislative Assembly that happened not too long ago. Do you condone your MLA, Lori Sigurdsson, I think making a pretty explicit comparison between the UCP's use of the notwithstanding clause and the Holocaust by reading a quote from the poem, First They Came. Do you condone this sort of language? And will you be encouraging Ms. Sigurdsson to apologize for making that comparison?
That is the most torqued question I have ever heard, and I'm usually very polite about this.
Yeah.
She read a poem about human rights, which I believe was written by a rabbi. And
by a Lutheran priest.
by a Lutheran priest, thank you for the correction. She read a poem about human rights. I know the UCP really, really wants to ban books. I suppose they want to ban reading poetry. I know what they certainly want to do is trample on people's human rights. And in fact, we know as early as today, they will use the notwithstanding clause again. So it is a perfectly fair comment, and who should be apologizing is the UCP for trivializing the Holocaust to cover up for their trampling on human rights for the first time in Alberta's history, passing a law they know to be unconstitutional.
Follow-up?
Bit of a doubleheader follow-up. Broad state of social democracy. You had a number of candidates to be the next federal NDP leader swinging through.
Nothing to do with me.
Will you be? But you have
Nothing to do with me. Thanks, Raheem. Next question.
Okay, no, so,
Oh, you had a doubleheader. Ask the other half.
I couldn't let you go without getting a reaction to Mr. Mamdani's win in New York City
Yeah.
On Tuesday. As someone who was once a 30-something Shia Muslim outsider who upended the politics of a major North American city, do you see what Mr. Mamdani accomplished in New York City as a continuation in any way of what you started 15 years ago in Calgary?
He's not quite one of our people, Raheem, but close. I watch politics very closely. I'm a political nerd, and it was an exceptionally electrifying race for many reasons. Certainly, I think politicians of all stripes are looking at his race and saying, geez, what can we learn there? There's a lot to be said about really clear, bold policy positions, not beating around the bush. There was a lot to be said there about alliance building among folks who are not traditionally allies. But I think the single most important thing about that race is the fact that it had record high voter turnout, the highest I think since 1969. And meanwhile, we just had municipal elections here in Alberta, which had among the lowest voter turnout in history because of election laws that were making it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. I believe in democracy. I believe anything we can do to get people engaged and excited about politics and out there voting is a good thing to do. Now, that said, people have created a lot of parallels between me and him. He is, I think, the third Muslim mayor of a major North American city. But there are a lot of differences. He's really well-spoken, extremely charismatic, and good-looking, and I managed to win with none of those things.
Thank you, Raheem. We're going to go to Janet French from CBC. Janet, go ahead.
Hi, let's go back to the wonky stuff about the bill.
Wonky.
Kyle, wonky. The Conflict of Interest Special Committee had this report from January that recommended, in which committee members recommended removing some political staff from under the Conflict of Interest law. Does this bill do that? Does this bill prevent against that? What do you think about that recommendation of having it apply to fewer political staff?
I think people in Alberta know that we don't get into elected roles on our own, and there are key advisors along the way and while we are governing that help us make decisions. It's really important that we hold those people to the same standard that we hold elected representatives, which is a high standard, and it needs to be because it's what Albertans expect.
Follow up, Janet?
So no, it doesn't. You don't support removing some of these political staff from the law. I just want some clarity on that. Second of all, if I recall correctly, the current conflicts of interest law has a super narrow definition of who is what kind of relationships would be potentially too close to have dealings with. I think it's just spouses and possibly children. Does the law, who does the law propose as including in relationships that would be problematically close for conflicts of interest to arise?
Right, so people have a perception of conflicts. And so we need to work in a world when we're dealing with perception of conflicts. And we go to the ethics commissioner to ask, is this perception of conflict, is it real? Is it going to impact the ability to make a decision? And we need to have someone in our democracy like the ethics commissioner in that role to make sure they can decide, what is a conflict of interest. There are clear connections, whether we have spouses or family, but we have close associates, whether it's brothers or good friends that we know that are in our sphere, and we need to make sure that the public knows that, so that when we're operating, we're making decisions that are not self-serving, that they are selfless service to Albertans.
May I jump in? You know, I think the critical thing here is that perception is often reality. And as Kyle says, we have to empower the ethics commissioner. But we also have to empower the ethics commissioner with legislation that that person must follow that follows the common sense of Albertans. You know, as leader of the opposition, I'm subject to the same conflicts of interest regulations as cabinet ministers. So I can't own any individual stock, for example, or operate any business. However, on the other hand, I can accept all these gifts. And when you have a situation where you've got a guy, the Minister of Justice, who stands up in the House almost every day to defend someone that he admitted very late in the game and had never previously disclosed is his best friend, his wife's cousin, his travel buddy, and his hockey bro, and he's standing up there defending that, Albertans have every right to say, well, that may not be a conflict of interest in the narrowest sense of the word, but clearly, if we're giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the Minister of Justice best buddy, and that guy is standing up in the ledge every day defending that there was nothing bad, nothing to see here, you know, Albertans have every right to go, come on. And if this government is so narrow in its talent pool that it cannot even exclude people like that from making these decisions, that's a big problem.
Thank you for that, Janet. We're going to go to Lisa Johnson from CP. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I also have a little bit of an off-topic. Oh, both my questions are off-topic, I guess.
I'll do it.
The Supreme Court of Canada says it will hear the Saskatchewan pronoun
Yeah.
law case. I'm wondering if you have any reaction to that, and any comments regarding that being heard by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's very clear that the reason that the government of Alberta, that Premier Smith has been using the notwithstanding clause and has signaled she's going to use it again and again and again, is to shield herself from judicial review. This is funny because in the last 6 months, the Premier has talked about how it's her duty to write bills that are constitutional that will stand up to judicial review. Now she's knowingly passing unconstitutional laws. But what today's decision shows, and we're going to watch very eagerly to see what the Supreme Court decides both on this case and on the Bill 21 case in Quebec, is that the Supreme Court is signaling that the notwithstanding clause is not an absolute shield, that they can still look at things. So, you know, it may well be that the Supreme Court will decide that this law is unconstitutional, but it has to remain in place for the 5-year period of the notwithstanding clause. We don't know. But the point is that the Premier thinks that she has got an all-purpose escape clause that she can use to pass unconstitutional legislation. And certainly the Supreme Court is signaling that there's a few more hoops before that.
Follow up, Lisa?
Yeah, thanks for that. Also, on the issue of UCP caucus members getting backlash, obviously we're seeing a lot of recall campaigns getting organized against quite a few of them. And recently, yesterday, the Agriculture Minister, R.J. Sigurdsson, posted on Facebook that he's been troubled in recent weeks by his staff and his family being subjected to yelling, obscene gestures, rude, even threatening behavior. And his office staff has also been subjected to unfair and unwarranted comments related to allegations of neglect in responding to residents. He says, quote, "This is grossly unfair." And he links it all back to, he says, "I know most of this stems from the decision to return children to school, more specifically the using of the notwithstanding clause to resolve the labor action." I'm wondering if you would also condone some of the behavior that I think he's describing here, or would you say that this is their actions coming home to roost?
Political violence and harassment is never acceptable. It's never acceptable. And folks, if you're harassing the staff of ministers' offices, don't do that. They didn't vote in the legislature. It wasn't their doing. And we can proceed in a very civil manner. However, we also have to remember that the arsonist shouldn't be the one calling the fire department. So this government has been fanning the flames of division and anger and hatred from the moment they took office. They want Albertans to be perpetually angry. That's what they do. They've blamed everybody. They blame vulnerable kids. They blame healthcare providers. They blame teachers. They blame frontline workers The only people they never ever blame is themselves. And of course, most recently, they've started to blame immigrants. But now what's happened is that this perpetual rage machine is people who are angry at them. And they don't know how to do. They're the most thin-skinned group I've ever seen. They clutch their pearls and they whine about harassment when they've been engaging in harassment all this time. So I'm calling for civility across the board, but I'm also calling for accountability. If you don't want people to be mad about you making unconstitutional decisions that hurt them, try not making unconstitutional decisions that hurt them.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We're going to go to our last question now. We have about 2 minutes because we need to get the leader to a Remembrance Day ceremony. Emily Williams from CBC, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Does this bill prevent people from accepting Skybox tickets, or is it just making them disclose?
Well, I'll give it to Kyle to talk about the details, but essentially what this does is it says a much harder cap than what the UCP has on the value of gifts you can accept, but also gives you the opportunity to, with ethics commissioner approval, so not the premier deciding, not the premier's chief of staff deciding, the ethics commissioner deciding, you can accept other things, but then you must disclose it. So it does it does three things. It sets a hard cap, it takes the decision-making out of politics and into the ethics commissioner, and it provides for mandatory disclosure. Did I get it all, Kyle?
Perfect, yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly right.
Follow up, Emily?
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful. And just a follow up. Should part of this be MLAs and staff also reporting their gifts to the public, not just the commissioner?
Oh, yes, very clearly so. So thank you for that clarification. When we say disclosure, we're talking about disclosure to Albertans. The challenge we have right now is for a lot of the gifts, the politician has to note it. They may have to let the ethics commissioner know about it, but it's very rarely disclosed. So we've seen that situation in ministers who admitted that they accepted Skybox tickets from MH Care and Sam Maraish, but then that never showed up on their public disclosure. We think that's wrong.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just a reminder that any questions and responses on the topic of Private Members Bill 202 is embargoed until the bill is tabled this afternoon in the legislature, which should happen at approximately 3 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. Please mind how you go.